Hello, everybody, and welcome to Beyond the Blocks for another great episode. I'm your host, Raven, and want to welcome you to another great episode. We got a great topic today. I'm really excited about it. It's something that is of the moment. Everyone's talking about AI right now. It could be another bubble. Who knows what it is? But one thing that's for sure is that AI has been kind of put into and being part of everything that we do, from programming to just how things are ordering things from Amazon, whatever, digital assistants, agents, etc., and even into art, which we thought, maybe art would be the last place that you find AI, but you're seeing that more and more, and there's a lot of debate about that, and also trying to really see where does AI fit in creativity, and also in the process of artists when they're doing generative art and algorithmic art. Join me today. I'm going to bring them all in. Hi, everyone. Welcome. It's great to have you here. I have a great panel of guests that I would love to just go around and introduce for this. So I'll start with artist Eko33, a great generative artist, Art Blocks curated artist, represented by Artx Code, who the founders are on this call, on this show as well. And just an amazing artist that I've been able to see, the last couple years really grow in your practice and really amaze collectors and everybody with the kind of almost spatial awareness, like the spatial dimension to your art is amazing. It's what, at least for me, what I've picked up on the most is combining kind of these generative textures with this 3D almost surrealist environment, and it's amazing stuff. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Raven.
And next we'll go to Sofia Garcia, one of the founders of Artx Code, also is a adjunct professor at NYU, teaching algorithmic art and art history in that regard. So a big expert to have on this show. Also, just a legend in the generative art space. Ask her about, the first shows with Tyler Hobbs and Dmitry Cherniak in the basement that she curated before all this madness happened. So a legend of this space. And last but not least, Toni Marinara. Amazing collector, also one of the co-founders of Artx Code, and just someone who, through since we've been in this space, has been an amazing curator. And also, on the collector front, you really have, before I think a lot of other people really started thinking of this, you really started, when you started to build your collection out, to really think deeply about what you were collecting, why you were collecting it, how different pieces fit together, not just, one piece by itself. And then beyond that, as an artist rep, you've now, really been able to see the what's special about certain artists and really elevate them well, and to really tell the rest of the world of why, this artist is special, which is great. So Toni, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having all of us. Really happy to be here.
So first thing, I would love to just jump in. And first, I think this is something on the mind of like everybody right now is, or a lot of people, is that they don't really understand, we in this space, we've had generative art for a little while. People have talked about it. AI art has made this kind of, in the last couple years, I would say, due to the technologies around it, has gained more prominence with sales like Bado's recent exhibition, with Verse, and there's also been there's been a lot of controversy as well around this as well. So I would love to go to Sofia first, and maybe you could kind of talk about maybe what is the differences between some of these art forms that we're talking about, maybe algorithmic art, AI art. Are they the same thing? Are they different? Maybe you could tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I would love to. And I haven't said it already. Thank you so much for having us. This is really, it's really great. Thank you for having me. Okay, so let's just start from the top. Generative art is, I would consider, an umbrella term for really any sort of art that where an artist is using a system, and it doesn't necessarily have to employ a computer or a computational device to be generative art. So really, it's again this idea of an artist who uses a system. This can be again like natural language rules, a computer program, or really just any sort of procedural invention. A really good example of this is a Soul-the-Wit wall drawing. And again, this is set into motion with some degree of autonomy. So the instructions are the rule. Then we kind of get into algorithmic art and this idea where we have a set of self-executable instructions, but really algorithmic art refers to any artist that relinquishes some sort of control to a program they have written that results in a completed art body of work. So that is kind of how I would describe algorithmic art in relation to generative art. And then again, now we have AI artwork, at the moment, I would really consider just AI art that can refer to really any instance where an artist applies AI tooling in the production of their artwork. But as a whole, we can really just look at artificial intelligence as a broad area of study that really just at its core employs algorithmic systems to find patterns in large data sets and create new content from that. And so, and then we have generative AI, which is another approach where it kind of automates the creation of that, where it's a little bit more, I would say, synonymous with prompt AI, which is not always the case. And there are a lot of different ways in which artists apply AI tooling in the creation of their art. And I think Eko is actually a really wonderful example of an artist who employs kind of all of these different techniques together. He is an algorithmic artist. He has written his own algorithms. He also has uses AI and kind of training it both on some of the systems that he's created alongside his artwork. So I think it's a really wonderful time to be able to kind of chat with him about this further in practice, but kind of at a holistic level, that's kind of how I would bucket those types of artwork.
That's great. Yeah, I'm so curious about when you said, these different categories of art and, how they've evolved over time. I think that's something that I think people are getting it more, but a lot of the people that started collecting over the last few years, they have, I think for generative art, they have this in their mind of, it has to be computers, or, it has to, some people even think that, generative art was invented when NFTs came out, and they don't understand that or, blockchain based art, for example, is generative art. And,
just to kind of touch on there is a reason why the term generative art really did become synonymous with computer algorithmic art. It was really in the 60s. There was a professor, Max Spence, who kind of preached around generative aesthetics, which is kind of this idea of being able to have an objective way of measuring aesthetic value. And a lot of his students were some of the early algorithmic art pioneers, Frieder Nake, Georg Nies, and they were really taking what he was saying and creating computer programs to kind of essentially prove this idea of generative aesthetics. So they started to refer to themselves as generative artists. But we have to thank some of the really amazing minds like Philip Galanter, who's done so much research on kind of the description, or how would one define generative art. And through all the research and the study, it's really kind of just whittles down to this idea of a systems-based approach to creating artwork, which again is kind of decoupled from the idea of using a computer. But the reason why generative art and algorithmic art became synonymous was because of that kind of school of artists in the 60s.
Yeah, that's great. How do you you are just so knowledgeable about this, and I think how can people? I just want to, as a side note, where should people be learning, and where are the best sources to go to kind of learn of the history of this art?
Directly
on the spot.
Eko33 himself.
What Tony?
And
It's,
one
I'll
thing
open
that
it up to the floor too. Like
I
I think yeah.
Eko33 is an amazing art historian. He's done some really good deep dives, here on Twitter, actually, in threads that make it super digestible because it is so overwhelming. Like, where do you begin? Obviously, Sofia is insanely well versed, but for people just like on an amateur level or just coming in, or even those who are at big generative art collectors, it's a lot to go and dig past. And I think that Mr. Jean-Jacques Eko33 has made that super approachable. I know he's also working on some new discussions surrounding generative art that might be super informative for people. So I think it'd be great to open up the floor to him and hear directly from the maestro.
Yeah, no, thank you. It was, I think I started in 2020 to publish these because I don't know if I was upset or anything, but I was hearing people, oh, generative art is brand new thing. Like you could say AI is a bubble today. I was like, hold on a second. We just a lot of people like from the 50s and the 60s. So I wrote this kind of very small, easy to digest, to kind of scratch the surface about a lot of very important artists, I believe. And at the end of each thread, you have a link to all the others, so you can move around a little bit.
Does that, I guess, how does that, as an artist, inform, how is the work that you're creating now informed by history and the past? It seems like from that you really studied the history of algorithmic art, of artificial intelligence, machine learning, etc. How does the history affect your process?
I guess even more than I realize, and it's a lot because first of all, for me, it's a sign of respect to know. I mean, what people have been working on in the same field, let's say for the past 1,000 years. Otherwise, you just arrive and say, I don't know. I mean, what's the point if you just arrive and you don't understand what was before yourself? So, well, at least that's for me. So I think these are the foundations. I still spend a lot of time today. As Toni just mentioned, I'm working on a new series of content about generative art, a little bit about AI as well, in a more long form format. So I'll go a little bit more in depth and trying to give it a more contemporary perspective, going beyond the kind of facts about the stories about this old artist. So in my work, it's a lot, and I think it's for a lot of artists as well, and even in
100%. Yeah. I was actually just looking around because I'm like, where did I put that book? It's always on my desk. But Steal Like an Artist. I'm sure you guys know this book, and it sounds really crazy, but and it's like, what do you mean stealing? But Eko, like you just said, I think to be a good artist, you have to know history. You have to know things aren't created in a vacuum, right? They come from, what's come before, right? And even in that book, which I think I remember, I've taken a lot out of it too, is know who your creative ancestors are. He talks about that, which I think is really cool. Almost you had back in maybe ancient Rome, you had philosophical schools or something like that, right? And they knew who was the other people in that school and thought like that and were kind of carrying on that school. And it's really interesting, at least to me, when I read that, to think oh, wait a second, you, by being creative and an artist, you're joining a lineage based on what you're creating and what you're inspired by, right? And to be deeply giving respect to those people that came before by using them as inspiration to build upon is great. And that's amazing.
And also it's a way, I think, part of our mission somehow is to show what could the future look like. As artists, we kind of are very early adopters of new technology. And if you want to save time and not reinvent the wheel, you'd better know if the wheel has been invented before, because otherwise you just recreate old stuff and you don't make progress. So
Yeah, I think that's something that's really interesting about that. Anytime I talk to artists on the show, this is, and myself included, is just there's always like the wanting to do something new and novel. And like you just said, you want to get there before anyone else does. But it's weird, like just the way of I guess the nature that it works is that it tends that a lot of people that are creative kind of circle around the same thought at the same time as things. And I guess this is in business as well, and things that they start to see that okay, now this is possible, or this is the makes sense to go in this direction after we've seen this other art that's come out or this technology comes out. Yeah,
I think if you look back to like the beginnings of what I would say our community at least recognizes as generative art, and you look at Vera Molnar, some of those earliest experiments are actually just homages to the greats that came before her. Her whole practice was inspired by Dürer and his study of the square, and that led her to go crazy with systems and squares, and led to all the fascination that you see of her with the actual square. It's
or Raphael Rosendahl right now with homage on at the LA county right in the window, right, Museum of Modern Art. That's an amazing piece based on Albers, and it's basically just an elevation of what Albers did with his work, but with animation and digital. It's a really really great piece. So it's amazing, what you're saying is that kind of elevating the past, and repurposing it and kind of bringing new things into it.
Totally. You gotta know where you're coming from to get where you're going, kind of thing.
Yeah. And Eko, I'd love to go back to you, because I think like that is a key to your work, right? Like I think, and that's something that I think, at least for me, when I look at it, I am really impressed. And I'd love to, if we could just start screen sharing now, and maybe walk through your work a little bit. Because, one thing that I've just kind of found with your work is, the first thing that kind of struck me was actually on your super rare. I'd love to go to that first, because I think that was kind of the kicking off point of where you started getting a lot of recognition in the space and in, from digital art collectors. So maybe you could talk about, how did you come up with this series, and what was your process to start creating these works?
Yeah, the first thing is I've been involved with AI in not in an artistic standpoint, but for quite a while. When the new tools arrived, when I say new, I would say like LLM driven, prompt driven AI tools. I was like, what the hell is that? I mean, you can't just prompt your way out of creating interesting artworks, at least visually speaking. So I had this kind of knee-jerk reaction. I was like, no, I hate that. But then I was like, okay, we were speaking about Vera Molnar, and she had to face like other artists at that time, a lot of adversity. And I was like, oh, actually, I'm that guy now who's like looking back and saying, yeah, this is not art, this is AI. So that was like the tipping point. And I was like, no, I can't, I have to kind of open to this and investigate before criticizing. So I kind of took a very deep dive into all that. But I wanted also to stick to my core values, which I wanted the result to be pen plottable, meaning as an SVG file. So it is a set of vectors and code, if you will. It's not a set of matrix of pixels. I wanted to train it also on my own data set. I wanted to use code and not using any prompt whatsoever in the works. So I would say as a classic generative artist, and as Sofia mentioned with Solewit, you put yourself some set of rules. You have the rules, you create your design, your systems, your limits, the boundaries you don't want to cross, and then you start getting your hands dirty. So that's when I started to work. this is like the genesis of this collection on Super Rare, and it was definitely a transitional moment in my career between like the full classic generative art approach. So based on what we were discussing in the beginning, which was 100% code using P5GS library, this was like what was being minted on art blocks, and I started to transition in like starting to use these new tools and having so much fun with it.
Neural sentiments, you didn't use AI in this? Or is this was
yes,
just...
there was. Yeah, it was a continuation of the series, which was like on Super Rare, which was like the transitional moment. And so neural sediment, no AI, just code. Then there was the Super Rare series and Latent Ink. So that's kind of the progression.
That's what I figured, because I'm like, I picked one. Which ones? I bought one like maybe this year, a little bit before. I think 100. I have number. Yeah, this is the one I have. Yeah. It's. I love this series and totally can see how, with art blocks, this release, I can see that the kind of connection to it, but the stuff when you started to go to Super Rare, it just got to a different level. Like, it's really, when you added the AI element in, that's when it just kind of like, at least when I first saw it, I was like, okay, this is something special, right? Like this feels like there is something different has happened, right? I think you as you're seeing art, as a lot of us who are collectors of digital art and looking at a lot of art, you kind of get the sense that things come out and you really enjoy it. But every so often there comes a moment that you see something and you're like, okay, this is different. Like there is something there is a fundamental, it kind of just shifts in your brain. Like, okay, this is really something I haven't seen before. And it's often in those moments. And then other artists kind of, come in and will, produce work in the same vein sometimes. But when I saw this, and it was specifically this output, I was like floored. And I was like, I remember being in here, zooming in and being like, one, as an artist, how did he do this? That's the first thing comes to my mind, is I'm thinking the technicality of it and thinking, wow, like, he has like full, kind of this 3D space in here. But these textures look like not AI textures. They look like, like more traditional generative textures in here. And I was just like, anytime I just noticed that, when like an artist is really good, whenever I am like, as someone who's really technical, I immediately am like, how did they do this? The other time this happened was with Chimera with MP Kaz. Was another time that I was just blown away and like, okay, I have no idea how he did this. And, and I even messaged him after that as well. But yeah, so Eko, just like, I guess my long-winded thing is just like, hats off to you for like creating such a bold aesthetic. And also maybe you could talk to us about it, as much as you're comfortable about your process of this. Like, how do you combine the, I guess like the AI layer and then generative like layer as well? Like, you have kind of, they're basically, one's a black box and one's, exactly what you're confining it. It's very confined. And that's the whole purpose of it, is writing the code in a way that it is, that you have full knowledge of everything that's going on in there. And for the audience, it's not technical. I'm just trying to explain that what the difference is, or one of the key differences is that with an AI, you are training it, you're giving it a bunch of content and then having it generate new content based on what it's been trained on, where it's a different approach. It's more probability based than a more deterministic, to use the word, way of more traditional generative art and programming, where you are explicitly typing out the exact bounds of the algorithm and letting the randomness fill in your structure that you've created, kind of.
And I think there is like a very strong connection, like at least conceptually speaking and also technically speaking. If you're an art blocks collector, you know that the seed value coming from the hash transaction, like this is like the key to the deterministic approach of a render, like a classical art blocks render. But you have the exact same thing with an AI model. It is also very much deterministic because you have this seed value that you can give to your model again, and it's going to generate the exact same thing.
Yeah.
So, I mean, conceptually speaking, you can like definitely connect two approaches, and you can also imagine having this kind of black box approach of like the AI model. I would say, yes, it's very hard to represent the weight of a model, because at the end of the day, it's a text file. So if you speak with people in the finance industry, they're really in a big pain, because if you have like a model managing assets and you want to explain to your client like how the model works,
it's hard to do.
That's going to be hard. But everything else is very clear. You use code. So maybe people have this kind of representation. You might use that on a Grok to kind of like create pictures where you prompt, but you can just like start your IDE, start coding with usually Python for AI is quite a common language. And you write code, but instead of using, let's say, the P5JS, which is like the bread and butter of classic generative art, you can use other libraries like math libraries, AI libraries. So in a way, the work is very close in terms of like the day-to-day activities, and it's just the tool set, which is a bit different. Conceptually speaking, of course, in one way, you're going to generate pixels. The other way, it might be different depending on what you work. To go back to your question, and this will be a bit technical, I'll try to keep it very short, is how do I work with this? Is I like to explain it as a dance where you have pure algorithmic P5 oriented works on one side, dancing with an AI model trained on my data. And then you have both of them. So for example, one of them is going to generate pixels and shapes. The other one is going to trace the lines you can see, because another condition I had is I want to make my works available in super high resolution.
Yeah.
So when you get them printed in like, I don't know, in like 1.5 meter, like it has to be no degradation. And the only way to do this is to write custom code, to have the lines being generated by an algorithm that you write with your hands and your brain. So it's really this combination of both. And the very last touch, I would say, is like using GLSL shaders, which for me is such a challenging technical approach. So I've combined both. If you think about it like a full stack, this is what I call the neurogeometry. This is like the umbrella term as we were discussing in the beginning for me in my work. This is like this neurogenerative geometry. The geometry is coming more from the code and the neuro is coming more from the AI. So you have a layer of P5, you have a layer of AI trained on my own data, and then you have a last layer of GLSL shaders. And this stack is making possible all this new way of working and expressing myself.
Yeah, because the one thing I noticed is like, are you using like a 3D modeling? Like, I'm curious of how you're generating the 3D aspect of it here and doing, the ray tracing kind of, because these shaders to get the light right in this, for example, in this one, you have to, the code has to know some element of 3D, the 3D space, right? You have to model that out. So I'm just curious if you're doing that with a like a 3JS type thing, or if it's like some sort of engine, like 3D engine, or if you are just doing that completely custom. curious about that. I know we're digging the weeds, but I think this would be really interesting to some people. So I think it's yeah.
I always use open source tools because it's very important to me. Also, from like a preservation standpoint, I think it's critical.
Yeah.
There are some rare cases or like a very small touch where you have like a 3JS library involved to generate some kind of structures. Because also when I train the model on my own. Like it's drawing, but it's also trained on like artificial, like synthetic data that I generate from the code. And some part of this synthetic data set is coming from 3D shapes. So if you look, and maybe it's more obvious with the latent ink collection, where you have this kind of rooms or like boxes.
Yeah, I know what you're.
This is
yeah, like this, like the perspective on this, right? Like how it's going towards that vanishing point. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, and I like to make the perspective wrong.
Yeah,
that because some of the works are like, if you think about the Mobius and the Gödel Eherbach book, I'm fascinated by this. So you have this kind of perspective.
Yeah,
and you look at it, you're like, but hold on a second. Yeah, this is not possible. And this is like, for myself, I'm like, yeah, this is like this is where I'm most the happiest.
It reminds me a little bit of Ben Kovac too, with like 100 print. If you look at those, I have one of those, and you look at it, one thing that's really cool and fascinating about that project as well, which you have done here as well, is to mess with the viewer's mind on perspective. Like you look at it in one way at one area of this, and you're like, okay, I get it. I see these, I see what it is. And then you look at it the other corner and you're like, wait a second, that doesn't match up. Now I'm looking at like, that's flat back there. And this is a whole different plane. Right. And messing with.
And if I may, so the very specific reason I'm doing this is because if we set aside all the tools, and if we think about the conceptual nature of the work, one of the core foundational like aspect in my work is the cognitive bias. And for me, this is the illustration of cognitive bias, where you think you see something, but actually it's not what you see, or it's not you looking at it. And if you get rid of all these kind of technicalities, the concept is in looking at something which you think it is something, but it's actually something else, or something which is absolutely just not possible at all.
Yeah, it's amazing work. I'd love to we're getting short on times. So, but I know that this group can go probably for another 2 hours and we would have a ball. So we should do another one for sure. But one thing I wanted to talk about is like, I wanted to bring up a, kind of, again, back to the kind of controversy of like a lot of this. When I brought it up and I was having a discussion with a friend, a couple weeks ago, and this person was a, very, a traditional artist, with painting and things like that, really more of a classical mindset kind of in this. And I started to show them some, AI art from, I think I did the Rupe's Vacation, which I really like. I don't know if you all know that. I'm sure you do, which he released on Verse. And I showed that artwork and was saying how I really love this AI artwork. And the person was very like kind of almost like critical of me and saying that, this is not art. Like this is because, and basically their argument was that because the artist isn't actually doing, has to actually develop the technical skills of executing, painting or something like that. Like their argument was kind of like the technical skills matter. And, versus just having a vision and then kind of handing that off.
And, the counter to that could be, do you like collage? Do you like pop art?
Yeah.
And that could really start to get them to think. I think that because it's a trigger word, AI art, right? Just like NFTs trigger people. And I think that it comes from a lack of understanding what's behind it. I think maybe if that person you spoke with listened to Jean-Jacques Eko speak now about how this the use of AI is, intertwining with his own drawings that he's training it on, and then this, handmade code, and everyone has their own different way. But I just really think a lack of education on the matter, and I'm sure Sophia has thoughts on that too.
I do, because there's a part of me that I'm empathetic to that thought process. I think when we started selling AI art in around like 2019, and I think one of the exciting parts of talking about it was the process. And one of the things that I could always ground essentially that criticism in, which is no, you have to understand that these artists are using their own data sets. Their training is taking them months to actually get to a point where this artwork is giving them something that they are even comfortable sharing. And these sorts of explorations of what GANs, especially in that time, like GANs could do. And so once we kind of started to get introduced to kind of AI powered by the LLMs, to Jean-Jacques' point, which is, there was that initial sort of like tension around it, but that's what makes it even more fascinating. And then seeing how now it is the role of the artist to be critical about that, to actually get into the weeds of understanding how these tools work and how they might be applied into your artwork. I mean, I think it's pretty, even like just comparison of using computers to create art in the first place. I think it's kind of this argument that happens time and time again. I mean, in the 60s, 70s, the idea of even making generative art was offensive to a lot of people. Like, how dare you use this machine that was made for war and for death to make art, something so sterile, these very crisp geometric artworks. Like, they thought it was complete antithesis to what creativity means. And so now we're kind of having this conversation again, but I think Jean-Jacques has the kind of this way of using it kind of as his creative what's the word that I'm looking for? I mean, assistant might be one word, but
cyborg.
Yeah.
Cyborg model. It may not win those people over, but that's what I look at.
No, it's like it's another like entity in his studio that he's using to translate what he wants to create. And I mean, I think it's going to take some time for people to also just understand and wrap their head around it. And the best way that they can do that is to start using it and see how excited they are now to realize that they can unlock some creative things that they never even thought of in the first place.
Yeah.
So,
I think the other argument to this that I said is that, okay, then, Jeff Koons is out. Like all these top artists that are the top contemporary artists today, a lot of them have huge studio teams that are executing their vision, right?
Yeah,
and they're not all the time, and sometimes a whole piece, they don't touch it, is executed by, their name is on it, but they are having studio assistants that are doing the painting, doing the assembly, etc., using art fabricators, then I think you have to then go and say, okay, that's not art, because, the artist is not actually doing the technical execution, right? So are you willing to go to that level? I don't know. Like,
that logic, Michelangelo's out, the Sistine Chapel, everything.
So,
Exactly.
But maybe the difference, because I can understand the assistant metaphor, but for me, an assistant is like a third party, like a trained third party. For me, the AI feels more like an exoskeleton.
Yeah.
This is like myself, like, I don't know how to qualify better. Like, imagine I am like lifting weight, and then you put this exoskeleton. It's still yourself. It's still your muscles and your brain controlling it. You just can lift much more and much faster. And this is very disturbing.
It's going to allow artists to scale their vision, just like those assistants maybe allow, Jeff Koons to scale his vision and to really execute on sculptures that, are just not possible, like, or are extremely, extremely hard to actually execute, which he could not do himself, right? Or the same thing with the Sistine Chapel, whatever you want to. It's another way of allowing artists to scale their vision, right? To levels that maybe they can't realize, they only can realize it in their brain, right? In their head. And now with AI, maybe it can use AI to actually scale and execute a vision that is beyond their capabilities themselves, right?
Yeah.
In a very personal way. Sorry.
I think we're all getting really excited about the conversation.
Yes.
We'll have to, Raven, you'll have to come on to Eko's podcast and talk it out even further. We'll dedicate a whole episode.
We'll do it. There will definitely be a round 2 to this one because I feel like we're just scratching the surface here.
Yeah.
I know this group loves to get into the philosophical, the deep level, which I love to do as well. So I think we'll definitely figure out a round 2 either here or somewhere else. But we are out of time. So for today, I think this is Tony's like, oh man, we're just getting started. I agree. I don't want to stop either, but I think this is a 30-minute show. We've pushed it to 45 minutes. So we will give you all your time back. And I want to thank you all for coming on the show. I know this was a great conversation. I know people are going to get a lot out of it. And I think there was a lot of just in our discussion, nuggets of people to start thinking more about, right? And then they can kind of explore and maybe think of what their thoughts are on that, or to look at the past and the history of algorithmic and digital art. So thank you all for coming on. Maybe you could just Eko, what do you guys have coming up? Do you have anything planned coming up you want to tell the audience about? Or what you're working on. If not, that's okay as well. I just want to give the opportunity before we
top secret.
What's coming out is to give back to the community for a long time. So it will be to share content, to answer any DMs, any questions anyone might have. My DMs are always open, and there will be some more surprises toward the later. But for now, it's time to discuss and think and help.
Amazing. And your work is just stellar. It's just getting better. Looking at these outputs, even just, browsing through it here, I'm just in wow, this is amazing. The level of narrative that you're able to put into these works, as well as them just being, again, something I've really never seen before, is really amazing. They don't just look good. They just have, I don't know. When I look at them, I get a deep sense of resonance emotionally with them. And really, you're really able to kind of put a piece of yourself in these pieces 100%. And I think everybody who views them can see that. So bravo.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all very much for also joining and for listening to this conversation. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode. Thank you very much. Thanks to Art Blocks, and ciao. Have a great rest of the weekend.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye, guys.
Bye.